Hello, I am Miss Blizzard and I will be discussing how the blood circulates in the human body and the key components that allow for this process. So let's start by making a mind map together. So blood moves throughout our entire body, so it reaches all of our cells. It is pushed by the heart through arteries and veins. So arteries are much thicker and has more layers to it, and it actually moves blood away from the heart, where veins are much smaller and they carry blood to the heart. So blood has to pass by the lungs to collect oxygen. So this is so that when the blood moves through the body, all the cells that we're made up of can breathe. So all cells need oxygen. So these are some of the basic points of the circulatory system. Why don't you try expanding this mind map on your own with other processes and parts of the body that you have learned that will fit with this? One key component in the circulatory system is the heart. It's a complex organ made with thick muscles so it can push blood to where it needs to be. This is why arteries and veins are so different from each other, because the heart is pumping the blood so strongly so it can move throughout the whole body. So the arteries carrying the blood away from the heart and to the body, if they had thin walls, they could easily rip or burst, which would not be good. Meanwhile, by the time the blood has reached the rest of the body, the push from the heart is not as strong, so veins carrying the blood from the body to the heart does not have to be so thick. It's like if you push your hand in a pool and you make a big wave at first, but as the wave gets further away, it gets smaller and it loses its momentum. So onto the heart itself. It has 4 chambers that keeps the blood pumping. So this is where it gets complicated because there's a left side and a right side to the heart, but you have to think about it differently as your own, because this is your left side and this is your right side. But you have to picture it as if it is in someone else's body, where this is their right side and this is their left side. So there are 2 kind of different parts to the heart, where they have the top smaller parts, which we call the atrium, and the bottom larger parts, which we call the ventricles. So we have the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle, and the left ventricle. So we have these 4 chambers, so the blood that has lots of oxygen that just came from the lungs does not mix with the blood that just came from the body and doesn't have as much oxygen. So that's the basic structure of the heart. Let's move on to see how the blood moves throughout the entire body. Now that we know a bit about the purpose of some of the components in the circulatory system and the structure of the heart, let's look at how the blood travels to collect and deliver oxygen. So let's start here in the lungs, and we'll have this little guy represent the blood carrying the oxygen. So from the lungs, it comes along the veins to enter through the left atrium, which moves down to the left ventricle, which exits through these arteries to the rest of the body. So this is a pretty basic structure. So once it hits the body, the blood loses the oxygen. So we'll trade it over this guy here. So the oxygen is lost, and then entering through the veins, it goes up back to the heart, where it enters through the right atrium. And then it goes down to the right ventricle, and then it heads through the arteries that move away from the heart and enters through the lung, where it now gains the oxygen. So this process repeats itself, entering through the atrium, ventricle, leaving through the arteries to the body where it loses the oxygen, and goes back through the veins to the atrium, the right atrium and the right ventricle, back to the lungs. This process repeats itself over and over, and is of course with many blood cells, not just one guy here. Yeah, and so this is a basic template of how the blood moves through the human body. So we can now use this knowledge to look further into the details, such as the components of the lungs that allow for the exchange of oxygen, and how blood pressure affects the system. Thank you for listening.